let's talk about foods related to the blue zones. The blue zones are 5 locations on the planet where there's the highest concentrations of people living past 100, and the populations also have very low rates of diseases that we see a lot of in the United States, like diabetes and heart disease. So researchers have looked at what the people in those locations do differently than the rest of us, and there are some positive health behaviors besides diet, but diet is has the biggest impact and is the biggest predictor. So in this series of videos, we're going to talk about the food guidelines or recommendations associated with the blue zones, what the people in those areas do to have the least disease and live the longest. So the 5 blue zones are Okinawa, Japan, Sardinia, Italy, Nicoya, Costa Rica, Icaria, Greece, and interestingly, Loma Linda, California. So the first list I want to talk about today is the best of the longevity foods that were common among all the locations, which is kind of interesting because the diets are so different. And the recommendation by the researchers who study the blue zones is to try and include at least 3 of these a day. So I have my sad rubber food models to show you instead of real food today, and then I also have some cardboard food models. So the first category of longevity foods is beans, and that includes not green beans. Green beans are fantastic, but in this case we're talking about kind of like dry beans. So garbanzo beans, navy beans or white beans, lentils or split peas, let me hold these closer, black beans, baked beans, refried beans, black-eyed peas, and one of my favorites, edamame, or sometimes called green soybeans. And you can buy these already shelled and frozen like this, and then you can just add them to salads or stir fries. But they also, you might be more familiar with them in the pod, like at a Japanese restaurant where you bite it and pull through and pull the beans into your mouth. That's the same beans as these. Okay, so category 2 is greens, like spinach, cabbage, any cooked green that you can think of. This is officially cooked spinach, but kale, chard, collards, any of the leafy greens, cooked or raw, are spectacular and a common thread among all these locations. Interestingly, its own category of longevity food is sweet potatoes. So that could be grated or microwaved or baked or sauteed or roasted. Any way you can do sweet potatoes is wonderful. Another category is nuts and seeds. So any nut or seed you could think of. Walnuts, pecans, almonds, cashews, peanuts, and sunflower seeds. Next category is olive oil. All by itself again, olive oil. There are certainly more what I would consider trendy fats that people are excited about, like avocado oil and coconut oil, and those might end up being great, but we don't have the research yet on those, and we don't have cultures that have been eating those fats for lots and lots of years and to be able to study them. And olive oil is different. We have the research to say that it's helpful. It's common in the Mediterranean diet. It's common in these blue zones. So I feel very comfortable telling you that olive oil is fantastic. The next category, again, is instead of just whole grains, is oats specifically. So that would certainly be, like rolled oats that you can make in a pan or microwave in the morning. But there's other forms of oats that might give you some variety. Steel cut oats, which you might be familiar with, which are basically the whole oat groat cut into 3 pieces so that it cooks faster. But of course, this is going to take longer to cook than rolled oats. And then this is going to take the longest to cook. This is oat groats, which is the wholest, grainest version of oats. It hasn't been processed at all, really. It hasn't been steamed and flattened into the oats that we're familiar with, like rolled oats or old-fashioned oats. They take longer to cook, but they are incredibly high in fiber, The texture is really lovely. It's really chewy and dense if you like that. If you don't like the mush of traditional oatmeal, the texture on here is wonderful. The next category, which I don't have a food model for, is barley, which again is so fascinating to me that it's these particular grains that seem to be wonderful. Barley could be used as a replacement for rice. You could put it half and half with rice if you don't like the texture as much. Most of us are familiar with barley probably the most in soup, like a beef barley soup. It's wonderful in that context, but anywhere you would use a grain, you could use barley. And again, it's got a wonderful chewy texture that's very appealing. And then our last longevity food recommendation that's common among all these blue zones is fruit, all kinds of fruit. So anything that's your favorite fruit, but we try and get color as best we can, the most variety of color. So bananas, cantaloupe or other melons, apples or applesauce, berries, strawberries, blueberries, raspberries, blackberries. They're all wonderful. Citrus like oranges and grapefruit, peaches and nectarines, mango, pineapple, grapes. And the beauty of fruit is it can be fresh, which is fantastic, but also canned fruit is lovely, especially if you can get it in its own juice instead of in heavy syrup, and dried fruit is also lovely. So to recap, beans, greens, sweet potatoes, nuts and seeds, olive oil, oats, barley, and fruit. And from that list, we're looking for 3 servings a day, or 3 times a day that you include those foods. And my last message just for you would be, if you think about all the foods I just showed you, the common thread, besides being related to longevity, is that they're all plant foods. All of the foods that seem to have the most health benefits for human beings, and everything I just showed you in this video, every single one comes from a plant and not an animal. Hopefully it's helpful to hear what foods to include instead of what foods to cut out. We'll talk about those too, but I think it's nice to start with the positive. Is sometimes if you make a plan to include more of the healthy foods, by default you start kind of nudging out some of the things we're not supposed to eat as much. So hopefully this gave you some ideas for foods to include 3 times a day.